The black Range Rover slowed to a crawl on Mountain Pass Road, 22 degrees below zero. No other vehicles for miles. The kind of isolation that made witnesses impossible and crimes easy. The passenger door opened. A figure in designer winter gear reached into the back seat and grabbed something small. Something alive. Something that didn't deserve what was about to happen. The German Shepherd puppy didn't make a sound as hands lifted it by the scruff of its neck. 4 months old. Black and tan fur already thick for winter. Amber eyes that had learned too young what cruelty looked like. The puppy flew through the air and hit the snowbank without ceremony. The door slammed. The Range Rover's engine roared. Premium tires carved fresh wounds into the frozen road as the vehicle disappeared around the bend. The puppy lay motionless in snow, already beginning to cover its trembling body, waiting to die for the crime of carrying secrets worth $247 million. 300 yards above on the ridge, Garrett Thorne watched through military-grade binoculars and felt something cold settle in his gut. Not the wind cutting through his jacket, not the temperature that made exposed skin dangerous after 10 minutes. Something older, something that had kept him alive through 4 tours in Kandahar when better men had died. Instinct. The kind that warned you about IEDs buried in roads that looked safe. The kind that told you when a village was friendly or when every smile hid a knife. The kind that had saved his life more times than he could count. Beside him, Phantom tensed. Every muscle in the German Shepherd's 70-pound frame went rigid. The dog's ears flattened against his skull. His amber eyes locked onto the spot where the puppy had landed. The same posture Phantom used when detecting explosives buried in Afghan dirt. Danger, not just cruelty, something worse. Garrett lowered the binoculars. 39 years old, 6 feet 1 inch, 183 pounds down from 200, before the shrapnel tore through his left leg in Kandahar and the nightmares started stealing his appetite. His beard was trimmed short gray, threading through the brown at his temples like frost on dead grass. Military buzz cut growing out into something civilians wouldn't stare at in grocery stores. Shoulders still broad under the camouflage jacket, but the weight loss showed in his face, in the hollows beneath his eyes, in the way his clothes hung loose where they used to fit. Retired Navy SEAL, Chief Petty Officer, medically discharged 14 months ago after doctors spent 18 hours putting his leg back together with titanium pins and surgical mesh. Living alone in a cabin his father had built 3 decades ago, when land was cheap and privacy was still possible. Healing, the Navy doctors had said. Finding yourself again. Take the time you need. They hadn't mentioned how loud silence could be when you'd spent 15 years surrounded by brothers who would die for you. They hadn't warned him that the hardest mission wasn't surviving combat. It was figuring out what to do when the combat ended and you were still breathing. But Garrett Thorne had learned long ago that some fights you couldn't walk away from. Some enemies had to be faced regardless of the cost. And some lives, small and fragile and forgotten by everyone who should have cared, were worth risking everything to save. I see it, boy, Garrett murmured to Phantom. His legs screamed in protest as he started down the slope. The shrapnel wounds from Kandahar hadn't healed right. Probably never would. 3 surgeries, 18 months of physical therapy. Doctors who did their best but couldn't undo what high-velocity metal did to bone and muscle. Pain was something Garrett had learned to file away in a compartment that didn't interfere with movement. Lock it down, push through, complete the mission. The puppy needed him. Everything else was noise. Phantom was already ahead of him, cutting through the drifts with the precision of a bond who had spent 6 years navigating terrain far more hostile than Colorado mountains. Retired military working dog. 4 tours. 2 Purple Hearts if the military gave medals to animals. A scar across his left shoulder from the explosion that had nearly killed them both. They had searched for each other for 18 hours through the rubble of a compound in Kandahar province. The building had come down during a firefight. Garrett trapped under concrete and rebar. Phantom bleeding from shrapnel wounds but refusing to leave. Digging, barking, leading the rescue team back again and again until they found his handler still breathing. Brothers. The kind of bond that transcended species. The kind that made sacrifice automatic and survival mean nothing if the other one died. They reached the road in under 4 minutes, boots punching through the crust, breath fogging in the brutal cold. The kind of cold that killed in hours if you weren't prepared. The kind that killed in minutes if you were a 4-month-old puppy with no body fat and soaking wet fur. The puppy was still there, half buried in snow, already starting to cover its black and tan coat. Shaking so violently, Garrett could see the tremors from 10 feet away. Hypothermia setting in, core temperature dropping. Minutes away from the point where warming wouldn't matter because vital organs had already shut down. But it wasn't crying, wasn't whimpering. Just watching him approach with those amber eyes, steady, unafraid, as if it had already accepted whatever came next. As if dying in the snow was just one more thing that happened when you were small and the world was cruel. Easy, little one, Garrett said softly. He crouched low to make himself smaller. Less threatening, the way you approached wounded animals who might bite out of fear even when you were trying to help. I'm not going to hurt you. Phantom approached first, moving with the careful discipline of a military working dog who understood that frightened creatures could lash out, who knew that trust had to be earned slowly. He sniffed the puppy once, twice, his nostrils flaring as he cataloged scent, information, threat assessment. Then Phantom did something Garrett had never seen him do in 6 years of partnership. He lay down beside the puppy and pressed his body against its trembling form, sharing warmth, offering protection. The way pack animals had protected their young for 10,000 years before humans decided they knew better. Garrett felt something crack in his chest, some wall he'd built after the explosion, after the evacuation, after watching good men die while he survived for no reason he could understand, after the 18 hours Phantom had spent searching for him while bleeding from his own wounds, refusing to quit, refusing to accept that his handler was gone. Okay, Garrett whispered. Okay, boy. I get it. He stripped off his jacket despite the cold biting into his arms immediately, wrapped it around the puppy, lifted the small body against his chest. The weight was wrong, too light, bones too prominent beneath the fur. This dog had been fed once, cared for once, but not recently. Something had changed. Someone had decided she was disposable. The puppy pressed its nose under Garrett's chin, seeking warmth, seeking safety, seeking the one thing every abandoned creature needed most. Someone to stop, someone to care, someone to say, not today, not this one, not on my watch. I've got you, Garrett said. The words felt inadequate for what he was promising, but promises were all he had. You're okay now. But as he turned toward his truck parked 300 yards up the access road, Phantom did something else unexpected. The big shepherd stood rigid, hackles raised along his spine, staring not at Garrett or the puppy, but at the road where the Range Rover had disappeared, following something invisible with his eyes, tracking movement only his senses could detect. The same posture he used when detecting explosives buried in roads, when danger was present but not yet visible, when something his training recognized even when his handler couldn't see it. Threat, not here, but close. What is it, boy? Phantom's growl was low, controlled, a warning rather than aggression. His eyes tracked something Garrett couldn't see, something moving in the distance. Something wrong. Garrett filed the information away. The puppy needed warmth, medical attention, food. Everything else could wait. But his training was already cataloging details. The tire tracks cutting through the snow, deep treads, expensive vehicle. The make, black Range Rover, late model, Colorado plates he'd memorized in the 3 seconds before it disappeared. Years of military operations had taught him many things. One of them was that random acts of cruelty were rarely random. Someone had wanted this puppy dead, had gone to the effort of driving 15 miles into isolated mountains to make sure she froze without witnesses. And Garrett Thorne was going to find out why. The cabin was 43 minutes from the main road when driving carefully on ice, tucked into a valley that his father had bought 3 decades ago when land was cheap and privacy was still possible. Surrounded by national forest on 3 sides, no neighbors within 5 miles, no cell service unless you climbed to higher ground. The kind of isolation that felt like freedom or prison, depending on your state of mind. Garrett had inherited it after the funeral. A place to heal, the doctors had said, a place to find yourself again. What they hadn't mentioned was how loud silence could be when you'd spent 15 years surrounded by brothers who would die for you. When the absence of gunfire and radio chatter and tactical briefings felt like drowning in cotton. Phantom had made the silence bearable. The big shepherd understood rhythms that other creatures couldn't. When to press close during nightmares. When to keep distance during the bad days when touch felt like sandpaper on raw nerves. When to simply exist in the same space without demanding anything. Without judgment. Without asking why Garrett woke up screaming, or why some days he couldn't leave the cabin, or why the smell of diesel fuel made him vomit. Now there was a new presence in the cabin, a small shivering presence that Garrett carried to the hearth and set carefully on a blanket he'd pulled from his own bed. Stay, he told Phantom. Watch her. The big shepherd settled into position without hesitation. his body a barrier between the puppy and the door. Protection instinctive, automatic. The same way he protected Garrett through 4 tours in one explosion that should have killed them both. Garrett moved to the kitchen, filling a pot with water, setting it on the stove to warm. His hands were steady. They always were during operations, during crisis, when action was required and thinking could wait. But something beneath his skin was trembling. Some recognition he didn't want to name. He hadn't planned for this, hadn't wanted this. After Phantom's retirement, after the explosion that nearly killed them both, Garrett had promised himself no more attachments, no more vulnerabilities, no more caring about things that could be taken away. He would heal, he would process, and then he would disappear into the mountains where nothing could hurt him again because nothing would matter enough to hurt. The puppy made a sound, not a bark, not a whimper, but something between. A question posed in a language older than words. Garrett turned. The small dog was watching him with amber eyes that seemed far too old for its age. Intelligent, assessing, waiting to see what kind of human he would be, whether he would help or hurt, whether promises meant anything or if the world was just cruelty dressed in different clothes. "You're going to be okay," Garrett said. More for himself than for the puppy. "We'll get you warm, get you fed," and then he trailed off. And then what? Drop her at a shelter where she'd be processed and maybe adopted, or maybe euthanized, depending on how many other dogs needed space. Leave her with strangers who might give her back to whoever had thrown her away. Pretend he hadn't seen the deliberate cruelty of that disposal. Phantom shifted, pressing closer to the puppy as if he could read Garrett's thoughts, as if he was saying the same thing he'd said in Kandahar when Garrett wanted to leave him behind to move faster. "Not happening. We stay together. End of discussion." "Yeah," Garrett muttered. "I know. Shut up." He carried the warm water to the hearth and began cleaning the puppy's fur, checking for injuries beyond the obvious hypothermia, frostbite on the paw pads, signs of abuse or neglect. Anything that would tell him who this dog was and what had happened to her. What he found made his jaw clench. Rope burns around her neck, deep ones, scabbed over but recent. The kind that came from being tied too tightly for too long, from fighting restraints, from desperate attempts to escape that left wounds and flesh. Someone had restrained this dog before dumping her, kept her captive, made sure she couldn't run, made sure when they threw her away she'd be too weak to survive even if she wanted to. "What happened to you?" Garrett murmured, his fingers gentle despite the rage building in his chest. "What did you see that made them want you gone?" The puppy's eyes closed briefly, exhaustion finally winning over vigilance. Her small body relaxed against the blanket, breathing evening out as warmth seeped back into her bones, trust given despite every reason not to give it. Garrett continued his examination, fingers moving through the thick fur around her neck where the rope burns were worst, and stopped. There was something there, something that didn't belong, something hard beneath the fur. He parted the coat carefully, heart rate spiking despite 15 years of training that taught him to stay calm regardless of what he found. Tucked against the puppy's skin, wrapped in waterproof plastic and secured with surgical tape, was a micro SD card. Phantom's head lifted. He knew the posture of discovery, had seen it hundreds of times in Afghanistan when Garrett found the thing they were looking for. The IED, the weapons cache. The evidence that changed everything. Garrett held the card up to the firelight, turning it over in his fingers. Standard storage device. The kind you could buy at any electronics store for $20. The kind that held photos, documents, secrets that someone wanted hidden. "What were you carrying?" he whispered to the sleeping puppy. "And who wanted you dead for it?" He shouldn't look. Whatever was on this card was none of his business. He was on medical leave, for God's sake. He was supposed to be healing, processing trauma, learning to function in civilian life, not investigating conspiracies, not diving into other people's problems when he could barely handle his own. He should turn it over to local law enforcement and forget the whole thing. Let them handle it. Let professionals with badges and authority and functioning mental health deal with whatever this was. But Garrett Thorne had spent 15 years running toward danger while everyone else ran away. And the card was already in his hand, and that puppy had been thrown away to die carrying evidence that someone considered worth killing for. He moved to his laptop, inserted the card, waited while the files loaded. The first documents were financial records, bank statements showing balances with too many zeros, wire transfers moving money in patterns that made no sense unless you understood how money laundering worked, property deeds for houses in states Garrett had never visited. The kind of paper trail that forensic accountants spent months untangling and prosecutors built careers on. Garrett didn't understand most of it. Numbers had never been his strength, but he recognized the pattern. Money moving in circles. Shell companies hiding ownership. The architecture of fraud built carefully over years. $18.7 million transferred from Harrison Ashford Personal Trust to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. 6 transactions over 14 months. Each one just under the $10,000 reporting threshold that would trigger federal investigation. Each one dated, time-stamped, documented with the precision of someone who knew they might need proof. The second file was a birth certificate. Name Ivy Rose Ashford, born March 15, 2016. Mother Elena Santos, deceased. Father Harrison Ashford. Garrett's breath caught in his throat. Harrison Ashford. He knew that name. Everyone in Colorado knew that name. Real estate developer who had transformed Denver's skyline. Philanthropist who donated millions to children's hospitals. The kind of wealthy that got buildings named after you and politicians returning your calls. The kind of success that looked perfect from outside. And he had died 2 weeks ago. Skiing accident on an expert run. The news had called it a tragedy, a loss to the community. Footage of his widow in black designer clothes looking appropriately devastated. The third file was a letter, handwritten in the careful script of someone who knew. These might be the last words that mattered. Scanned in high resolution, dated 3 weeks before Harrison Ashford's death. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. My name is Harrison Ashford. The girl in these photos is my daughter Ivy. Her mother Elena died last year from cancer. I've tried to protect Ivy ever since. Tried to keep her safe while building a case, while documenting everything. But my family will never accept her. My wife Vivian sees her as a threat to the inheritance, to the reputation, to everything she spent 30 years building. I've heard her on the phone, making plans, talking about eliminations and solutions and problems that need to disappear. I've hidden this evidence in the safest place I could think of. Ivy's puppy, a dog that never leaves her side, that she loves more than anything. If something happens to me, someone will find this. Someone has to. Someone will care enough to do what's right. Please, whoever you are. My daughter exists. She deserves to live. She deserves everything I wanted to give her. Don't let them erase her. Trust the soldier on the mountain. Harrison Garrett read the letter 3 times. His hands had stopped shaking. His mind had gone cold, focused. The same state he entered before every mission when planning gave way to execution and thinking became doing. A wealthy man was dead. His secret daughter was somewhere out there unprotected. And his widow had just tried to destroy the only evidence that the child existed by throwing a puppy into 22-degree below zero temperatures to freeze. Trust the soldier on the mountain. How had Harrison known? How had he known that a retired SEAL lived 300 yards from the road where the puppy would be dumped? How had he known that Garrett would be watching at exactly the right moment? How had he planned for something this specific? Coincidence, luck, providence, fate. Garrett didn't believe in any of those things, but he believed in signs, in messages that arrived when you needed them most, in doors that opened when you finally stopped running from yourself. Phantom rose from his position beside the sleeping puppy and padded over to Garrett, pressing his head against his handler's leg, the signal for confirmation, for solidarity, for whatever you're thinking, I'm with you. Garrett looked at the puppy, then at the letter, then at his canine partner, who had refused to leave him in the rubble of Kandahar even when it meant dying together. We're not done, boy, he said quietly. We've got a mission. And for the first time in 14 months, Garrett Thorne felt something other than pain and guilt and the crushing weight of surviving when others hadn't. He felt purpose. The morning came without mercy. Garrett had slept 3 hours, maybe 4, his body folding into the rhythm of half-rest that 15 years of combat had made permanent. The kind of sleep where you never quite let go, where part of you stayed alert for threats, where dreams mixed with reality until you woke up unsure which was which. Phantom had stayed by the fire through the night, positioned between the puppy and the door, occasionally lifting his head to listen to sounds that human ears couldn't detect. The creak of the cabin settling, wind through the pines, the absence of sounds that should have been there. The puppy Garrett had started calling her Scout in his mind, though he knew better than to name things he might lose, had survived the night. She was weak, dehydrated, but her eyes were clear and her breathing was steady when she woke it at dawn. Small victories, the kind you celebrated in war zones, still breathing, still functional, still capable of continuing the mission. Good girl, Garrett murmured. offering her water from a shallow bowl. She drank carefully, tongue lapping in precise motions, then looked up at him with an expression that seemed almost grateful, as if kindness was surprising, as if she'd learned to expect cruelty and gentleness confused her. His phone buzzed. A text from his former commanding officer at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado. Medical Review Board meets next Tuesday. Be ready to present your case. Garrett stared at the message for a long moment. The board would determine if he could return to active duty. If the leg had healed enough, if the psychological evaluation showed sufficient recovery, if Chief Petty Officer Garrett Thorne could be trusted in combat again. 6 months ago, he would have done anything to get that clearance, to return to the teams, to be useful again instead of broken. Now he set the phone aside without responding. The Navy could wait. The Navy always waited. Bureaucracy moved at its own pace regardless of urgency. But a little girl who might be erased from existence, she couldn't wait. Every day increased the danger. Every hour gave the people who wanted her gone more time to plan, more time to act. He loaded Scout into the truck, wrapping her in his jacket again despite the cold that immediately bit into his arms. Placed her in the back seat where Phantom could watch over her. The big shepherd had adopted the puppy without hesitation, and now apparently the mission as well. The drive into Lumber Falls took 45 minutes on roads still treacherous from overnight ice. The veterinary clinic was a small building on the edge of town, white clapboard siding that needed paint. A sign that read Dr. Sarah Webb DVM, all creatures great and small. She was in her 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, hands steady from decades of surgery on animals that couldn't tell you where it hurt. The kind of competence that came from caring more about results than credit. Found her on the road, Garrett said, carrying Scout inside. Someone dumped her. Sarah's expression darkened. She took the puppy gently, professional instincts already cataloging what she saw: hypothermia, malnutrition, dehydration, abuse. German Shepherd, maybe 4 months old, severely underweight. Her fingers found the rope burns around Scout's neck and went still. Someone tied her up before abandoning her. These wounds are deep, recent. She was restrained for hours, maybe days. I noticed. Sarah looked up at him, something sharpening in her gaze. Recognition mixed with calculation. This is the third German Shepherd abandoned near Mountain Pass this month. All young, all from the same general area, all with signs of abuse. Garrett went completely still. Training kicking in, pattern recognition. 3 incidents wasn't coincidence, it was targeting. Someone's going after specific dogs, Sarah continued, her voice dropping. Or a specific owner. Where? Sarah hesitated. Client confidentiality, professional ethics. The boundaries that kept her license intact and her practice running. But then she looked at Scout. At the rope burns. At the evidence of cruelty that went beyond neglect into deliberate harm. There's a grandmother and granddaughter who live up near the old mining road. Rosa Delgado and her granddaughter Ivy. They've had dogs, multiple dogs over the past 6 months. All disappeared or killed. Rosa filed complaints, but nothing happened. Like the authorities didn't want to investigate. The name hit Garrett like incoming fire. Ivy. Ivy Rose Ashford. Ivy whose birth certificate was on the SD card. Ivy whose father had tried to protect her. Ivy who was 8 years old and living with her grandmother and being systematically terrorized. How do you know that name? Sarah's eyes widened. Garrett didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing, connecting dots that formed a picture he didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. The birth certificate, the letter, the puppy dumped in the snow carrying evidence, and now 3 dogs targeted over 6 months. Someone had been working up to this, testing defenses, creating fear, making Rosa and Ivy feel helpless before the final move. Classic psychological warfare. Break the target's will before the kill shot. Where do they live? Garrett asked, his voice taking on the command tone he'd used to lead men into combat. Rosa and Ivy, exactly where? I can't just give out, Dr. Webb. Garrett leaned forward. Let her see the certainty in his eyes, the absolute conviction that came from understanding the stakes. That little girl is in danger. The puppy I just brought in was carrying evidence of conspiracy and murder. Evidence that someone is willing to kill to destroy. If I don't find Ivy before they do, she's dead, and her blood will be on both our hands. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The truth was simple and terrible. Sarah studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face must have convinced her, because she reached for a pen and paper with hands that trembled slightly. Old Mining Road, about 15 miles past the Henderson property. Small cabin with a green roof. Rosa's truck is usually parked outside, but Mr. Thorne, she caught his arm as he turned to leave. These people, whoever is doing this, they're not playing games. Rosa's been harassed for months. Her chickens killed, her well poisoned. She filed complaints, but nothing happened. It's like, she trailed off, shaking her head. It's like they have protection, Garrett finished. Yes, like someone powerful is making sure no one investigates, making sure Rosa stays vulnerable. They probably do have protection. Garrett met her eyes. But so does Ivy now. He drove too fast, pushing the truck through corners that made Phantom brace against the seat and his rebuilt legs scream in protest. Scout whimpered once, then fell silent, sensing the tension in the air, understanding that something had changed, that this was no longer rescue. This was war. 15 miles past the Henderson property, the road turned to gravel, then dirt, then barely a path through snow-covered pines. The kind of isolation that felt peaceful in summer and threatening in winter, where help was far away and screams didn't carry. Garrett's military training kicked in automatically, scanning for ambush points, noting terrain features that could provide cover or concealment, calculating escape routes and rally points in fields of fire, the tactical assessment he'd done 1,000 times in hostile territory. The cabin appeared without warning, a weathered structure that looked like it might collapse under the next heavy snowfall. A rusted Ford pickup sat outside, buried to its wheels in ice. Smoke curled from a crooked chimney. Signs of life, but barely. Signs of survival at the edge of giving up. Garrett parked and stepped out, Phantom immediately at his heel in formation. The cold bit into his face, but he barely noticed. All his attention focused on the cabin, on the door that opened before he reached the porch. A woman in her 70s stood in the doorway, face carved by hardship and fear, eyes that had seen too much loss. She held a shotgun that shook in her hands but was pointed in his general direction with enough intent to be dangerous. "Stop right there," she said, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "I don't want trouble." Garrett raised his hands slowly, non-threatening, submissive posture, the way you approached scared people with weapons. "I'm not here to bring trouble, ma'am. I'm here to help." "That's what the last one said." Rosa's voice broke. "Before they killed my chickens, before they poisoned my well, before they took my granddaughter's dog." Garrett's heart clenched. This was Rosa Delgado, Elena's mother, Ivy's grandmother, the woman who had been terrorized for months while authorities looked the other way. "The puppy," Garrett said softly, "the German shepherd, black and tan, about 4 months old. Her name is Scout." Rosa's gun wavered, her face going pale. "How do you know her name? How do you—" "I found her." Garrett crouched slowly, reaching back toward the truck. "I found her on Mountain Pass Road. Someone threw her from a black Range Rover, left her to freeze to death." He opened the back door. Scout lifted her head at the sound of voices, ears perking forward, recognition flooding her amber eyes. Rosa made a sound, half sob, half scream. The shotgun clattered to the porch as she ran toward the truck. "Scout, oh my baby. Scout, is that you? Oh, my precious girl." "Grandma," a small voice from inside the cabin, a small figure appearing in the doorway. Ivy Ashford was 8 years old, dark hair pulled into a ponytail that needed brushing, wearing jeans that were too big and a sweater with holes in the elbows. But her eyes were Harrison Ashford's, looking at Garrett now with a mixture of hope and terror that no child should ever have to feel. "Ivy," Rosa was crying now, pulling Scout from the truck with hands that couldn't stop shaking, clutching the puppy against her chest like she might disappear again if Rosa let go. "Ivy, come look. He found her. He found Scout." Ivy ran. She threw herself against the puppy, wrapping thin arms around the small body, burying her face in the fur Garrett had cleaned just hours ago. "You came back," Ivy whispered between sobs. "They said you were gone forever. They said you went to a better place and I'd never see you again. But you came back." Garrett felt something twist in his chest. He had seen children in war zones, children who had lost parents, homes, everything they'd ever known. But somehow this little girl crying over a puppy in the Colorado snow hit harder than any of it. Maybe because this wasn't a war zone. This was supposed to be safe. This was America. Home. The place soldiers fought to protect. And yet here was a child being hunted in her own country while people with power looked away. Phantom moved to Ivy's side without being commanded, lowering himself to her level, tail wagging slowly, the gentle approach of a dog who understood trauma, who knew that trust had to be earned. The girl looked up, startled, then reached out a tentative hand to touch Phantom's scarred shoulder. He's gentle, Garrett said softly. His name is Phantom. He protects people, like Scout protected you. Ivy studied Phantom for a long moment, running her small fingers through his fur, finding the scar from the explosion that had nearly killed them both. He's been hurt, she said, her voice too wise for 8 years old. Like me. Yes, but he healed, and so will you. Ivy looked up at Garrett with those dark eyes that held Harrison's intelligence and Elena's strength. Are you the soldier on the mountain? The question stopped his heart. How do you know about that? Daddy wrote it in his letter. He said if anything bad happened to him, I should trust the soldier on the mountain. He said you'd help me when no one else would. Her voice steady despite the tears. Are you going to help me? Garrett thought about the letter on his laptop. The financial records documenting $18.7 million in theft. The widow who had killed her husband and was now trying to erase his daughter from existence. He thought about phantoms searching for him through rubble for 18 hours. About Scouts surviving temperatures that should have killed him. About Harrison Ashford trusting a stranger he'd never met to protect the one thing he loved most. Yes, Garrett said, I am. Rosa invited him inside, though the shotgun stayed within reach. The cabin was barely larger than Garrett's living room, heated by a wood stove that threw more smoke than warmth. Everything was clean but worn. Furniture that had survived decades. Curtains patched with mismatched fabric. The smell of poverty doing its best to be comfortable. Coffee? Rosa asked, her hands still shaking from adrenaline and relief. Please. She moved to the stove while Ivy sat on the floor with Scout. Phantom positioned between them and the door. The big shepherd had adopted both the puppy and the child without hesitation, protecting them with the same intensity he'd protected Garrett in Kandahar. How did you find her? Rosa asked, pouring coffee into chipped mugs. The road where they dumped her. It's 20 miles from here. How did you know to look? I didn't. I was hiking the ridge. Saw the whole thing happen. A black Range Rover stopped. Someone in the passenger seat grabbed Scout and threw her out, then drove away. Rosa's face went pale. She set the coffee pot down with a clatter. They were trying to kill her. They were trying to destroy evidence. Garrett pulled out his phone, showed her the scanned letter. Your son-in-law knew what was coming. He prepared. Rosa read in silence, her eyes filling with tears that spilled without shame. When she finished, she had to sit down. The weight of Harrison's words too much to bear standing. He was a good man, Rosa whispered. He loved Elena more than anything. When she got sick, he paid for the best doctors, the best treatments. He sat with her for hours, read to her, held her hand when the pain got bad. And after she died, he kept visiting Ivy, bringing presents, telling stories. He was going to change his will, make sure Ivy was taken care of the way Elena would have wanted. Her voice hardened, grief transforming into anger. But then his wife found out. Vivian Ashford. That woman is evil. Rosa's hands clenched around her coffee mug hard enough to crack ceramic. She married Harrison for his money. Everyone knew it, but he was lonely after his first wife died. Vulnerable. Vivian was beautiful, charming. She played him perfectly. Waited 30 years for him to die so she could inherit everything. And when he finally decided to do the right thing to acknowledge Ivy to give her what she deserved. She couldn't finish. She didn't need to. The skiing accident, Garrett said. It wasn't an accident. Rosa shook her head, tears falling faster now. Harrison was the best skier I ever saw. He grew up on these mountains, started skiing when he was 3 years old, competed in college. He didn't just fall off a cliff. Experienced skiers don't make those mistakes. She looked at Ivy, still wrapped around Scout on the floor, whispering secrets to the puppy in a language only they understood. Rosa lowered her voice even further. I think Vivian had him killed, and now she's trying to destroy any evidence that Ivy exists. The birth certificate, the financial records showing he set up a trust for her. Everything Harrison did to protect his daughter. Vivian wants it all erased, wants Ivy erased. The birth certificate, the letter, Scout's collar as the hiding place. Harrison had known his time was running out. Had documented everything with the precision of a man who understood he might not live to see justice done. Had trusted that someone somewhere would find his evidence and do what he couldn't. Trust the soldier on the mountain. He was right, Garrett said quietly. I found it. I found everything he hid. Rosa's tears fell faster. Relief and grief mixed together until you couldn't tell them apart. But now they know you have it, And they'll come for you too. They'll kill you like they killed Harrison, like they tried to kill Scout. They don't stop. They never stop. Garrett thought about Phantom's warning on the ridge, the way the big shepherd had stared at the road where the Range Rover disappeared. Danger recognized. Threat assessed. Enemy identified even when invisible. Let them come, Garrett said, his voice dropping to the tone that had led men into combat, that had promised to bring them home or die trying. I've been dealing with enemies for 15 years. This is no different. Rosa looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, taking in the military bearing, the scars visible on his hands, the quiet certainty of a man who had faced death and learned to function despite fear. You're willing to risk your life for a little girl you just met. Garrett glanced at Ivy, who had fallen asleep against Scout's warm body, Phantom standing guard over both of them. The image reminded him of why he had joined the teams in the first place. Not for glory, not for adventure, but because some people needed protecting and someone had to do the job. Because innocent lives mattered more than personal safety. Because the strong had a duty to defend the weak. I've been risking my life for strangers for 15 years, he said. At least this time I know their names. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Garrett's instincts flared, but he answered anyway. Standing, walking outside, away from Ivy's ears. Thorn! A woman's voice. Smooth, controlled, cold enough to freeze water. Mr. Thorn, I understand you found something that belongs to me. Garrett's grip tightened on the phone. He stepped further from the cabin, making sure Rosa couldn't hear. Making sure Ivy stayed protected from this. Who is this? I think you know. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge, Vivian Ashford? Had to be. The widow. The killer. The woman who had thrown a puppy into the snow to protect her secrets. I'm going to do what I always do, Garrett said calmly. Protect people who can't protect themselves. A soft laugh. Musical. The kind that belonged at cocktail parties, not conspiracy. How noble. How naive. A pause calculated for effect. Let me be clear, Mr. Thorne. You're a wounded soldier on medical leave. You have no jurisdiction, no authority, and no idea what you're dealing with. I have lawyers on retainer who cost more per hour than you made in a year. Judges who owe me favors. Police chiefs whose campaigns I funded. I have resources you can't begin to imagine. You also have a problem, Garrett replied. The evidence Harrison left, it's not just in one place anymore. It's been copied, distributed, secured. If anything happens to me, or to Rosa, or to Ivy, it goes public. Everything. The murders, the fraud, all of it. Silence on the line. The first crack in Vivian's composure. The first sign that she hadn't planned for this contingency. You're bluffing. Try me. Another pause. Longer this time. Calculation happening on the other end. Risk assessment. Cost-benefit analysis of a woman who viewed human life as a ledger entry. You have no idea what you've started, Mr. Thorne. Vivian's voice had changed. Harder now. The polish stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. That child is nothing. A mistake. A bastard that Harrison was too weak to handle properly. She will never inherit a cent of what I've built. I will see to that personally. She's a little girl, Garrett said quietly. And she's going to inherit everything her father wanted her to have. I'll make sure of it. We'll see about that. The line went dead. Garrett stood in the snow for a long moment, his hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Despite knowing he had just declared war on an enemy with infinite resources and no moral constraints. Phantom whined softly from the doorway, sensing the shift in his handler's mood, understanding that the mission had changed, that this was no longer rescue. This was combat. I know, boy, Garrett murmured. He walked back inside. Rosa was watching him with frightened eyes that had seen this play out before. That knew what happened when you threaten powerful people. That was her. Wasn't it? Yes. What did she say? Garrett looked at Ivy, sleeping peacefully for the first time in God knew how long, protected by two dogs who would die before letting anyone hurt her. She said we should be afraid. Garrett met Rosa's eyes. But fear is just another weapon, and I stopped being afraid a long time ago. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying snow across the frozen landscape. Somewhere in that white expanse, a woman sat in a mansion built on blood money, planning her next move, calculating how to eliminate the witnesses to her crimes. But Garrett Thorne had spent 15 years in places where the enemy had every advantage, where the mission seemed impossible, where survival meant refusing to quit Even when quitting made sense. He had found a puppy in the snow, discovered a conspiracy, met a little girl who needed someone to fight for her. The war had just begun. And this time Garrett Thorne wasn't fighting for strangers on the other side of the world. He was fighting for family. The evidence spread across Garrett's kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle no one was supposed to solve. Financial records documenting theft, death certificates raising questions, toxicology reports suggesting murder, a handwritten letter from a dead man who had known exactly what was coming. Sheriff Tom Hendricks stood over the table with the expression of a man watching his world tilt sideways. 58 years old, weathered face that had seen 30 years of small-town crime, cautious eyes that had learned when to look closely and when to look away. The kind of law enforcement who survived by understanding which battles could be won and which would destroy you, until the battles became impossible to ignore. Arsenic, Hendricks said. His finger traced the toxicology report with hands that had forgotten how to stay steady. 0.47 milligrams per deciliter in Harrison Ashford's blood. That's not accidental exposure. That's not environmental contamination. That's deliberate poisoning over months. 6 to 12 months of steady administration, Garrett agreed. Small doses in food or drink. Symptoms that look like natural illness until it's too late. The sheriff picked up another document. Death certificate number 2. Marcus Pemberton, third husband, died 2012. Cause of death, cardiac arrest during routine physical examination. Ruled natural causes. She's done this before. It wasn't a question. The pattern was too clear once you knew to look for it. Garrett slid 4 more death certificates across the table. Husband number 1 through 4. All dead within 18 to 30 months of marriage. All ruled natural causes or accidents. All leaving substantial estates to their grieving widow who wore black beautifully and cried at exactly the right moments. 4 times before Harrison, Garrett said, $247.3 million total inheritance across 5 murders. Hendricks sat down heavily in the chair that creaked under his weight, the color draining from his face as the implications settled. My God, we've had a serial killer operating in this county for 30 years, for my entire career, and nobody saw it. People saw it. They chose not to act, or they were paid not to act. The sheriff looked up sharply. What do you mean? Garrett pulled out the list of names Harrison had compiled over years of quiet investigation. Judges who made favorable rulings, prosecutors who declined to investigate, police chiefs whose campaigns received generous donations. Each one marked with dollar amounts and dates and the careful documentation of a man building a case he knew he might not live to present. Vivian Ashford has been buying influence since 1994, Garrett said. Every person who could investigate her, every official who could charge her, every judge who could convict her. She identified them, cultivated them, owned them. Hendricks stared at the list, looking for his own name, finding it absent. Small mercies that felt meaningless in the face of such comprehensive corruption. This is bigger than one woman's crimes, the sheriff said quietly. This is a network. This is systematic corruption that goes all the way up to the state level. Yes. If we move on this, if we try to arrest her based on this evidence, every corrupt official on this list will circle the wagons. They'll bury the evidence, destroy witnesses, make it all disappear. They have too much to lose. I know. So what do? Garrett thought about Ivy sleeping in Rose's cabin, protected by 2 dogs and an old woman with a shotgun, and hope that was running out faster than time allowed. We build a case they can't bury, Garrett said. We find allies they don't own, and we move fast enough that they can't react before we have them in custody. His phone buzzed. Text from Beckett Hayes, his former intelligence analyst. The man who had kept Garrett's team alive through 4 tours by knowing things before the enemy did. By seeing patterns in data that looked random. By understanding that information was a weapon more powerful than any rifle. Found your pattern. 4 previous husbands all dead. Sending full dossier now. The files came through. Garrett opened them on his laptop while Hendricks leaned over his shoulder. Husband number 1, Robert Caldwell. Tech entrepreneur. Married 1994. Died 1996. Fell from hotel balcony in Aspen during anniversary trip. Blood alcohol content 0.21. Ruled accidental despite having no history of heavy drinking. Husband number 2, Marcus Pemberton. Investment banker. Married 1998. Died 2000. Drowning accident while sailing off the California coast. Ruled accidental despite being an experienced sailor who had competed in regattas. Husband number 3, Douglas Hartford. Commercial real estate developer. Married 2003. Died 2005. Carbon monoxide poisoning from faulty furnace in vacation home. Ruled accidental despite the furnace having been serviced 2 weeks prior. Husband number 4, Vincent Sterling, oil and gas executive, married 2008, died 2012. Cardiac arrest during morning run. Ruled natural causes despite being in excellent health and having run marathons. Husband number 5, Harrison Ashford, real estate developer and philanthropist, married 2014, died 2 weeks ago, skiing accident on expert run. Ruled accidental despite being one of the best skiers in Colorado. She waits 2 to 4 years, Hendricks said, his voice hollow. Long enough for suspicion to fade. Long enough to seem like genuine tragedy instead of pattern. Then she kills them using methods that look accidental or natural. Look at the estates, Garrett said. First husband, 41 million. Second, 38 million. Third, 52 million. Fourth, 63 million. Fifth, 53.3 million. She's been getting richer with each murder, building wealth, building power, building the resources to make the next murder easier. And more confident. The first one was made to look like drunken accident, sloppy but effective. The last one was a skiing fall witnessed by a paid guide, bold, public, confident that her network would protect her even with scrutiny. Hendricks pulled out his phone with hands that couldn't quite remember how to function properly. Who witnessed Harrison's accident? Who was the guide? Garrett already had that file open. Eric Carlson, ski guide at Breckenridge Resort, filed a statement saying Harrison lost control on an expert run called the Widowmaker, said he went over the edge before Carlson could react. No other witnesses, just Carlson's word. Where's Carlson now? Beckett's next message came through before Garrett could answer. Precision timing that came from monitoring the conversation somehow. Carlson bought one-way ticket to Costa Rica 3 days after Harrison died. Paid cash, living in beachfront condo in Tamarindo. Purchase price $2.1 million. Ski guides make $40,000 to $60,000 per year. Do the math. He was paid off, Garrett said. Vivian's pattern. Find a witness who can be bought. Pay them enough to disappear. Make sure the story stays clean and simple. Accidental death. Tragic loss. Move on. Hendricks stood, pacing the small kitchen with the energy of a man who had just discovered his entire career had been built on lies. We need more than patterns. We need proof someone will testify to. Someone who will stand up in court and say what actually happened. Someone she doesn't own. Garrett thought about the will, the real will that Harrison had mentioned in his letter. The document that would prove Ivy's inheritance, that Vivian had to destroy before anyone found it. I know someone, Garrett said to him, someone who has as much reason to want the truth as we do. Who tell him? Harrison's son, Trenton Ashford. The sheriff's eyes widened. You think he'll turn on his stepmother? Risk his own inheritance? Stand against a woman who's killed 5 times to protect her money? I think he'll turn on the woman who killed his father. I think blood matters more than money to some people. And I think Trenton Ashford deserves the chance to choose which kind of man he wants to be. Trenton Ashford answered on the third ring. His voice was careful, controlled. The way people spoke when they suspected their phones were being monitored by someone with resources to do it properly. Mr. Ashford, my name is Garrett Thorne. I have information about your father's death. Silence on the line. So long, Garrett thought the connection had dropped. Then breathing. Processing. Fear and curiosity fighting for dominance. How did you get this number? That doesn't matter. What matters is that your father was murdered, and the people responsible are trying to eliminate the only witness to their crimes. I don't know what you're talking about. The words automatic, defensive, but the voice underneath was uncertain. Your half-sister, Ivy, the daughter your father loved but couldn't publicly acknowledge because your stepmother threatened to destroy him if he did. Your stepmother is trying to erase her from existence because she stands to inherit half the estate, because Harrison changed his will 3 weeks before he died and Vivian murdered him before he could file it properly. This is insane, but Trenton's voice was cracking. Vivian would never, she wouldn't. She already has. She's killed 5 times. Your father was number 5. She's been doing this for 30 years, building wealth, eliminating husbands when they became inconvenient. And now she's coming for an 8-year-old girl whose only crime is being born. Trenton was breathing hard on the other end of the line, the sound of a world collapsing, of beliefs dissolving, of everything you thought you knew turning out to be lies. This is crazy. You're crazy. I should hang up. I should call the police. The police are on her payroll. So are the judges. So are the prosecutors who would investigate. Your stepmother has been buying protection for 3 decades. That's how she's gotten away with it for so long. That's why your father had to hide his evidence in a puppy's collar and hope someone honest would find it. Evidence? What evidence? Bank transfers showing 18.7 million stolen from your father's trust. Emails between Vivian and her accomplices planning his murder. A letter Harrison wrote 3 weeks before he died explaining everything he feared would happen. He was right about all of it. Garrett paused. Let that sink in. Let Trenton process what it meant. I also have Ivy's birth certificate, DNA results proving she's your blood relative, your father's daughter, your sister. Right now, she's an 8-year-old girl hiding in a cabin in the mountains with her grandmother, wondering if she's going to survive the week. The silence stretched. Garrett could hear Trenton processing, struggling with the weight of what he'd been told, fighting against it and toward it at the same time. Why are you telling me this? Trenton finally asked. What do you want from me? I want you to meet me, see the evidence yourself, and then I want you to decide what kind of man you are. Whether you're the kind who looks away when innocent people are murdered, or whether you're the kind who stands up even when it costs you everything. And if I refuse, then your sister dies. Vivian will make sure of it, and you spend the rest of your life knowing you could have saved her. Knowing you chose money over family. Knowing you're exactly the kind of person your father raised you not to be. The words hung in the air like a verdict, like judgment rendered before the trial even started. Where? Trenton asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The diner on Maple Street. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Come alone. Don't tell anyone. Don't use your phone to look up directions. Don't do anything that might alert Vivian that you're having doubts. You think she's monitoring me? I think she's monitoring everyone who might threaten her. I think she's survived this long by being paranoid and prepared. And I think if she knows you're talking to me, we're both dead before morning. Garrett hung up before Trenton could change his mind, before fear could override curiosity, before the moment passed and the decision became impossible. Hendricks was watching him with an expression somewhere between admiration and concern. That was a hell of a gamble. What if he goes straight to Vivian? What if he warns her that you have evidence? Then we move faster. Arrest her tonight on what we have. Force the issue before she can destroy more evidence. We don't have enough for an arrest warrant. Not yet. Not without more proof. Then we better hope Trenton chooses the right side. The sheriff nodded slowly, then pulled out his own phone with the deliberation of a man making a decision that would define his legacy. I'm putting unmarked patrol cars near Rose's cabin, starting tonight. If Vivian makes a move, if she sends anyone to eliminate Ivy, we'll be there. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Hendricks met Garrett's eyes. If this goes wrong, if Vivian's lawyers get involved before we have her in custody, we're both finished. She'll destroy what's left of our lives. Ruin us so completely that nobody will believe anything we say. Then we'd better make sure it doesn't go wrong. Trenton Ashford arrived at the diner at 8:57 a.m., 3 minutes early, the mark of a man who had been raised with discipline, even if he'd never been truly tested by it. 28 years old, handsome in the polished way of people who had never worried about money or opportunity. Designer jacket that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Perfect hair styled by professionals. The kind of confidence that came from privilege rather than achievement. From doors that opened because of your last name rather than your character. But his eyes told a different story. Haunted, uncertain. Like someone who had just discovered the ground beneath his feet was made of glass. Like someone who suspected the truth but was terrified of confirming it. Garrett slid into the booth across from him. Phantom settled at his feet beneath the table. The big shepherd had insisted on coming, and Garrett had learned long ago not to argue with his partner's instincts. You came, Garrett said. I almost didn't. Trenton's voice was hoarse, exhausted. I've been up all night, going through my father's papers, his emails, trying to convince myself you're crazy, that everything you said was lies or misunderstanding or conspiracy theory. Did it work? Trenton shook his head slowly. My father changed 6 months before he died, started canceling meetings with Vivian, disappearing on weekends, being secretive about where he went. I thought, he stopped, swallowing hard. I thought he was having an affair, that he'd found someone else and was planning to leave Vivian. I was angry at him, thought he was being selfish, destroying our family for some woman. He was visiting his daughter. I know that now. I found receipts last night. Gas stations near the old mining road. Restaurants in towns near where you said Rosa lives. Toy stores. Children's clothing. He was building a life with Ivy, a real life, not hidden, not shameful. He was preparing to acknowledge her publicly. Garrett pulled out the folder of evidence and slid it across the table. Birth certificate at the top, then financial records, then Harrison's letter, then the photographs of Ivy that her father had kept hidden for 8 years but couldn't bear to destroy. Trenton opened the folder with trembling hands. He read in silence for several minutes, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, grief, and finally anger so raw it transformed his features into something Garrett recognized. The look of a man who had just discovered he'd been lied to about everything that mattered. "She killed him," Trenton whispered. "Vivian actually killed him. Murdered my father for money, for inheritance, for power. And she's trying to kill his daughter too, to erase the evidence, to make sure Ivy never inherits what Harrison wanted her to have." Ivy. Trenton said the name like it was made of broken glass, like speaking it might cut to his mouth. "I have a sister named Ivy, an 8-year-old sister I've never met, who's been living in poverty while I lived in mansions, who's been terrorized while I was safe." His hands clenched around the papers hard enough to crumple them. Why didn't he tell me all those years? Why didn't he just tell me the truth? Did he think I wouldn't understand? Did he think I'd choose Vivian over family? He was trying to protect everyone. You, Ivy. Her mother, Elena. Your father made mistakes. He waited too long to fix them. But in the end, he did the right thing. He left evidence. He tried to make sure Ivy would be taken care of, even if he wasn't there to do it himself. And Vivian found out. Vivian has known for years. She's been waiting for the right moment, gathering power, eliminating threats. When your father finally decided to change his will to acknowledge Ivy publicly, she killed him before he could. Trenton looked up, and there was steel in his eyes that Garrett hadn't seen before. The steel of a man who had just discovered what he was capable of when pushed beyond limits. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to help me get proof she can't destroy. The real will. The one your father wrote giving Ivy her inheritance. It's in Vivian's estate, hidden somewhere she thinks is safe. And you're the only one who can get me inside without triggering security. She has cameras, motion sensors, guards who patrol the grounds, a security system that cost $500,000. I know. That's why I need someone who belongs there. Someone who can walk through the front door without raising alarms. Someone she won't suspect." Understanding dawned in Trenton's eyes. "You want me to bring you in as my guest? A family visit, dinner with my stepmother. She won't suspect anything if you show up wanting to discuss the estate, wanting your share. She'll be too busy calculating how to manipulate you to notice anything else. And if she catches you, if security finds you in her private study, going through her safe." Garrett glanced at Phantom, who was watching Trenton with calm, assessing eyes, measuring, judging, deciding if this man was worthy of trust. "Then my partner and I will improvise. It's what we do best." Trenton was silent for a long moment, staring at the photographs of Ivy, of a little girl he'd never met but who shared his blood. Who was his responsibility now, whether he wanted it or not? Then he pulled out his phone and began typing. "I'm texting my assistant, telling her I'm going to visit my stepmother tonight, that I want to discuss estate planning and my father's legacy, that I'm concerned about maintaining family unity during this difficult time." He looked up with a grim smile. "Vivian will think I'm coming to negotiate my share, to make sure I get what I'm owed. She'll be so focused on manipulating me that she won't notice you. Are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. Once you help me, you're choosing a side, and that choice will cost you everything Vivian can take away. My father trusted you." Trenton pocketed his phone. He hid his evidence in a puppy's collar and prayed someone would find it. Someone did. Someone cared enough to risk their life for a little girl they'd never met. He met Garrett's eyes. "That's not coincidence. That's providence, and I'm not going to ignore it." Garrett thought about the moment on the ridge, the split-second decision to investigate instead of continuing his hike, the puppy's steady eyes meeting his without fear, Harrison's letter finding its way to someone who would act instead of ignore. Maybe Trenton was right. Maybe some things were bigger than coincidence. "Tonight," Garrett said, "pick me up at the junction of Route 7 and Mountain Pass Road. 7 p.m. sharp. Don't be late. Don't bring your phone. Use a burner if you need to call. And don't tell anyone where you're going or who you're meeting." "I'll be there." They shook hands across the table. Two strangers bound by a dead man's secret and a little girl's life. Two men who had just declared war on a woman who had killed 5 times and would kill again without hesitation. The mission had begun. The Ashford estate sat on the mountainside like a monument to blood money. 37,000 square feet of marble and mahogany and glass, 14 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, indoor pool, wine cellar, art collection worth $8 million. Security system designed by the same company that protected embassies. All of it bought with murder. Garrett had studied the blueprints for 6 hours, memorizing layouts, identifying entry points, planning escape routes, calculating sight lines and blind spots in the 17 seconds it would take security to respond to an alarm. The same preparation he'd done before every mission in Afghanistan. The difference was this enemy wore Prada instead of tactical gear, and the battlefield was marble floors instead of desert sand. Trenton's sedan pulled up to the gate at 7:03 p.m. 3 minutes late, just casual enough to seem unplanned, just sloppy enough that Vivian wouldn't suspect rehearsal. The guard barely looked at them. Family had access, always had. That was the weakness in every security system. The assumption that blood equaled trust, that relatives couldn't be enemies. They parked in the circular drive beneath lights that cost more than cars. Trenton climbed out first, straightening his jacket, putting on the mask of the dutiful stepson who had come to pay respects and discuss inheritance like a good little heir. 5 minutes, he said quietly without looking at Garrett. I'll get her attention in the main sitting room. Service entrance is on the east side behind the kitchen. Staff will be preparing dinner. You should be able to slip past if you move fast and stay quiet. Where's the study? Second floor, west wing. There's a balcony outside with a hidden alcove where my father used to smoke. You should be able to get close enough to hear without being seen. And the safe behind the painting of the Swiss Alps, left wall, combination is 0315. Ivy's birthday. Garrett checked his watch. See you on the other side. Trenton nodded once, then walked toward the main entrance, his posture shifting into the role of a man who belonged here, who had every right to be here, who was family instead of threat. Garrett waited exactly 5 minutes, then moved. The service entrance was unlocked. First mistake. Rich people always assume their security systems made physical locks unnecessary. They were wrong. Security systems could be bypassed. Cameras could be avoided. But an unlocked door was an invitation. The kitchen was controlled chaos. 3 chefs, 2 servers, all focused on preparing a dinner that would cost more than Rose's monthly rent. Nobody looked up as Garrett slipped past. Just another contractor, another invisible servant in the machinery of wealth that required armies of workers to maintain the illusion of effortless luxury. He found the back stairs, the ones servants used, built in an era when help was meant to be invisible. Narrow and steep and designed to keep the working class separated from those they served. Garrett climbed quickly, listening for voices, footsteps, any sign that someone had noticed the stranger moving through their house. The second floor was quiet, carpet thick enough to muffle sound, paintings on the walls worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. The kind of wealth that bought anything, including justice. The study door was closed but not locked. Overconfidence. The belief that security systems and guards and money made traditional security unnecessary. Garrett slipped inside, closed the door with a soft click that seemed loud in the silence. The room was exactly as Trenton described. Mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with books that had probably never been read. Oil paintings of landscapes that Vivian had probably never visited. The aesthetic of wealth without the substance of culture. And on the west wall, a landscape of the Swiss Alps, mountains painted in oils. Maos, no, that would never melt, a scene of beauty hiding secrets. Garrett moved to the painting, lifted it carefully. The safe was a Browning Pro Steel, high-end residential model, 6-digit combination, the kind that would take hours to crack without the code. But Garrett had the code, 0315, Ivy's birthday. The lock disengaged with a soft mechanical click. Garrett pulled the door open slowly, careful not to disturb anything, careful not to leave evidence that anyone had been here. Inside, stacks of cash bound with rubber bands, jewelry boxes containing diamonds, property deeds, stock certificates, and a manila envelope marked in Harrison's handwriting, last will and testament, revised, do not destroy, the real will, the one that acknowledged Ivy, the one Vivian had to destroy before anyone found it. Garrett photographed every page with his phone, high-resolution images that would stand up in court, proof that couldn't be denied, evidence that would convict. But as he was returning the will to the envelope, he heard footsteps in the hallway, coming closer. Garrett froze. The will was still in his hands, the safe still open, the painting leaning against the wall. No time to close it, no time to hide. The door opened. A woman in a housekeeper's uniform stood in the doorway, 60 years old, face carved by hard work and long hours, eyes that had seen too much to be easily shocked. "Who are you?" she whispered. Her accent suggesting Eastern Europe, her stance suggesting fight over flight. Garrett raised his hands slowly. Non-threatening posture. Voice calm despite adrenaline flooding his system. "I'm here to find proof that Harrison Ashford was murdered. His real will. The one his widow is trying to hide so she can steal his daughter's inheritance." The housekeeper's eyes went to the documents in his hands, to the safe, to the painting. Something flickered across her face, recognition, understanding, and something else, relief. "You're the soldier," she said quietly, "the one Mr. Harrison wrote about in his letter, the one who would find the evidence and protect his daughter." Garrett's heart skipped. You knew about Ivy." "I've worked for this family for 23 years. I watched Mr. Harrison change these last months. Watched him become secretive. Watched him prepare for something." Her voice dropped. "I cleaned his study. I saw the photographs he kept hidden, the little girl with his eyes. I knew Mrs. Ashford was dangerous, but I couldn't prove anything. I couldn't help." She stepped into the room, closed the door behind her with hands that knew how to move silently. "Take what you need. Photograph everything. I'll make sure the security cameras on this floor malfunction for the next 10 minutes. Electrical problem. Happens sometimes in old houses." "Why are you helping me?" "Because Mr. Harrison was kind. He treated staff like people. He remembered our names, our children's names. He was a good man married to a monster." Her eyes hardened. "And I won't let that monster erase his daughter. Not while I can stop it." "Thank you." The housekeeper nodded once, then disappeared down the hallway like she'd never been there. Garrett finished photographing the will, returned it to the safe, closed the painting, moved to the balcony where he could hear voices from the sitting room below. Vivian's smooth contralto, a man's deeper rumble, and underneath it all, the clink of crystal and the false warmth of civilized conversation. Garrett activated the recording device, positioned it carefully, then settled into the alcove Trenton had described and waited. "Trenton's visit is unfortunate timing," Vivian was saying, her voice measured, calculating, every word chosen for effect. "But manageable. He's always been easily manipulated. Show him some affection. Promise him control of the foundation. He'll fall in line." And the other problem, the male voice belonged to Wyatt Sterling, Harrison's business partner. The man who had stood beside him for 15 years. The man who had certified the skiing accident. The man who had helped murder his friend for money. The soldier being handled. "My people are watching his cabin. When the time is right, we'll deal with him the same way we dealt with Harrison. An accident, tragic but explainable." Garrett's blood ran cold. They were planning to kill him, probably tonight. Probably while he was breaking into Vivian's estate and couldn't defend himself. "What about the evidence?" Wyatt pressed, his voice nervous. "The documents Harrison hid. The puppy was supposed to freeze, supposed to destroy everything. But someone found it. Someone has the evidence now. The puppy was supposed to solve that problem." Vivian's voice hardened. "Apparently someone found it before it froze to death. But it doesn't matter. Without the original documents, whatever copies exist can be dismissed as forgeries. We have lawyers for that. Experts who will testify they're fabricated. Money buys truth, Wyatt. You know that." "And the girl Ivy." A long pause. When Vivian spoke again, her voice was ice. "The girl is a complication, but complications can be eliminated. When the estate clears probate and the insurance pays out, we'll have resources to handle everything properly. A tragic accident, a house fire perhaps. The grandmother used a wood stove. These things happen in winter. Old cabins, faulty chimneys, bodies too burned to identify clearly." Garrett's hands trembled as he recorded. Every word, every damning admission, being captured, stored, preserved as evidence. "How soon?" Wyatt asked. "Soon, once we've dealt with the soldier, once the evidence has been discredited, once I'm certain there are no other loose ends." Vivian's voice dropped. "And no one will ask questions. The sheriff is manageable. The local prosecutor owes me favors. By the time anyone thinks to investigate, there won't be anything left to find. The girl will be gone. The evidence will be gone. And life will continue exactly as I've planned it." Garrett had heard enough, more than enough. He needed to move, get this recording to safety, to Beckett. to anyone who could use it before Vivian put her plan into action. But as he stepped back from the window, his boot caught on a loose board. The sound was small, barely a creak, a sound that would be meaningless in any other context. It was enough. What was that? Vivian's voice sharpened into something predatory. Garrett froze, pressing himself deeper into the shadows. Through the window he could see Vivian rising from her chair, moving toward the balcony doors with the smooth grace of a hunter who had just heard prey stumble. Probably just the wind, Wyatt said, his nervousness making him stupid. These old houses settle, make noise. My house doesn't settle. Vivian's hand reached for the door handle, and it certainly doesn't make noise I don't recognize. The door opened. Vivian Ashford stood framed in lamplight, 55 years old but looking 40 from excellent genes and better surgery. Designer dress that cost more than Garrett's truck. Jewelry that sparkled with the kind of cold fire only diamonds produced. Hair perfect, makeup flawless, the picture of sophisticated wealth. But her eyes were cold, dead, the eyes of something that looked human but had forgotten how to feel. Garrett stepped forward, directly into her line of sight. No point hiding now. Good evening, Mrs. Ashford. Vivian's face went white. For one frozen moment, she simply stared. Shock, fear, and fury cycling through her expression in rapid succession. You. The word came out like a curse, like something poisonous that burned her tongue. How did you get in here? I was invited. Garrett smiled coldly. Your stepson sends his regards. Trenton, Vivian's eyes widened, understanding and betrayal fighting for dominance. Trenton brought you here, into my home. He wanted to introduce me to the woman who murdered his father. I have to say you're exactly what I expected. Beautiful, charming, completely empty inside. Vivian turned toward the interior, her voice rising to a scream. Wyatt security, get up here now! But Wyatt Sterling was already moving, not toward Garrett, toward the door, running with the panic of a coward who had just realized the game was over. Wyatt! Vivian screamed again, desperation cracking her polished facade. The door slammed behind him, footsteps receding down the hallway. Vivian turned back to Garrett, her face contorted with rage that made her ugly despite the surgery and makeup and expensive everything. You have no idea what you've done. I have lawyers, judges. I have resources you can't comprehend. You're a nobody, a wounded soldier with PTSD and no authority. You think you can come into my home and threaten me? I'm not threatening you. Garrett held up the recording device. I'm ending you. This is a taped confession to 5 murders, conspiracy to commit murder, and plotting to kill a child. Your voice, your words, your plan to burn Rosa and Ivy alive. Vivian's face went gray, the color draining as she understood what she'd done, what she'd admitted to while thinking she was safe. That's inadmissible, her voice barely functioning. Illegally obtained. No court will accept it. My lawyers will. Courts aren't my only option. Garrett stepped closer. There are journalists who would love to hear this. Social media platforms that can spread information faster than any lawyer can suppress it. By tomorrow morning, every news outlet in the country will be running the story of how Vivian Ashford murdered 5 husbands and planned to burn an 8-year-old child alive. Your face will be everywhere. Your name will be poison. You're bluffing. Try me. They stared at each other across the balcony, predator and prey, though it was no longer clear which was which. What do you want? Vivian's voice had changed. Calculating now, looking for leverage, for weakness, for any angle she could exploit. Money, I can give you money, more than you'd make in 10 lifetimes. Name your price. I want Ivy to inherit what her father intended. I want you to confess to Harrison's murder. And I want you to spend the rest of your miserable life in prison thinking about all the people you destroyed for money that didn't make you happy anyway. Vivian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound devoid of humor. You think you've won. You think one recording changes anything. I've been building this empire for 30 years. I've survived investigations, scandals, threats. One soldier with a grudge and a recording device isn't going to. I'm not just one soldier. Trenton stepped through the study door, his face pale but determined. Behind him came Sheriff Hendricks, flanked by 2 deputies with hands on their weapons. Trenton, Vivian's voice turned pleading, syrupy, the practiced manipulation of someone who had used family as a weapon. Sweetheart, whatever this man has told you, whatever lies he's filled your head with, he told me the truth. Trenton's voice was steady, despite tears streaming down his face. Something you never did. He showed me evidence. Proof, my father's letter explaining everything he feared would happen. And you know what? He was right about all of it. I can explain everything if you'll just listen. Just give me a chance to. I've spent my whole life listening to you. Trenton shook his head. Listening to you criticize my father. Listening to you complain about his charity. Listening to you talk about money like it was the only thing that mattered. I'm done listening. Sheriff Hendricks stepped forward, reading from a card with hands that were finally steady. Vivian Ashford, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and 5 counts of first-degree murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. This is outrageous. Vivian's composure shattered completely, the mask falling away to reveal the monster underneath. You can't arrest me in my own home. I'll have your badge. I'll have all of your badges. I'll destroy every single one of you. You're welcome to try, ma'am. Hendricks nodded to his deputies. Cuff her. Vivian screamed as they approached, a sound of pure rage mixed with terror, the howl of a predator finally caught in a trap it never saw coming. She fought, clawed, kicked, required both deputies to restrain her while she cursed them with language that no amount of money could make civilized. Garrett watched without expression as they led her away, still screaming, still fighting, still refusing to accept that for the first time in 30 years, she hadn't won. There was no satisfaction in this moment, no triumph, just the grim knowledge that justice was slow and imperfect and came too late for the people who had already died. But it had come, finally, and that would have to be enough. Trenton appeared at his side, his face wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. Wyatt ran. I saw him heading for the garage, probably trying to flee before we can arrest him too. He won't get far. Garrett pulled out his phone and dialed Beckett. I need you to flag Wyatt Sterling's vehicle. He's fleeing the Ashford estate right now, heading north toward the interstate. Probable destination is airport or border crossing. Get state police on it. Already done, Beckett replied with the confidence of someone who had anticipated this exact scenario. Units are in position. He'll be in custody within the hour. Garrett hung up and turned to Trenton. You did the right thing. The hard thing, but the right thing. Did I? Trenton's voice cracked. I just helped arrest the woman who raised me. The woman who was the closest thing to a mother I had after mine died. I betrayed my family. You stopped a murderer. You protected your sister. You chose justice over convenience. Garrett gripped his shoulder. Your father would be proud. Trenton nodded slowly, then looked at Garrett with something like wonder. How did you know? How did you know I'd help instead of warning Vivian? Garrett thought about phantoms searching for him through rubble, about scouts surviving temperatures that should have killed her, about Harrison trusting a stranger to save his daughter. Sometimes you have to trust that people will do the right thing when it matters most. That blood means something. That honor exists even when it's expensive. They stood in silence. 2 men who had just changed the course of multiple lives, who had chosen the hard path because it was right. Outside, sirens wailed as more police arrived, as the machinery of justice ground slowly into motion, as the case that would dominate headlines for months began its journey from crime to trial to verdict. But for Garrett, the night wasn't over. Not yet. Vivian was in custody, but Ivy was still vulnerable, still in danger from whatever contingency plans Vivian had set in motion, still living in a cabin that could burn, still protected by nothing but an old woman and 2 dogs and hope. He needed to get back, needed to make sure they were safe, needed to stand guard until this was truly finished. The mission wasn't complete until everyone came home alive.